So I'll just read a couple of these endnotes. So the first one I'll read is endnote 25. A constant obscurity results from the location of the Hekla in proportion to the rotation of the Earth. It is a vantage. The sun searches out and cannot find them, because they are hidden by the rotund bulge of our planet. The all-seeing eye of God can hardly seek out the traces of their figures, lost to time, lost to light, on the other side of Earth from life. The transmission of their experience must take a roundabout path, bouncing off the cold solar orbs of writing. History is preserved in these globules of ice, bound into Arctic glaciers. And as they are in search of a passage that does not exist, a passage that leads from one side of the world to the other, they likewise keep a record that cannot pass through. Their reality, is concealed inside a jocular skewed code that cannot be pierced or deciphered save through embellishment. Jokes, fictional anecdotes, little stories tethered to the real through a subjective thread that has long since expired. Their whole story is therefore a history of vantage, a question of modulating interpretation. It transforms me, the transcriber, the first reader of this edition. More than a typist, I am an archaeologist and anthropologist, spinning armatures out of potsherds and sculptural remains. My shovel nicks a point on their vacant bodies, glinting in the sunlight like a tin can. The wind against the back of my neck feels like someone's fingers brushing me there. Caroline, who is the publisher of this book, just wrote to tell me, this is her email, she should be reading this. Also, I had this idea because I feel like this project is somehow environmentally minded, but obliquely so. And so I wanted to point to that somehow. I heard this crazy statistic on the radio that last year was the first time that, due to global warming, there wasn't any ice in the northern Arctic Circle. And they're saying that if we persist as we have been, there will be no ice next year. What if we have that on the opening page with the first, last year X percentage of ice melted as a result of blah, blah, blah. And then on the very last page, it would say, if we continue, there will be no ice at all next year. For a moment, as I turn around, I think I might see them, the two of them, Hooper and Wakeham, those are two sailors, on opposite sides of the fire, burning within the great belly of the Hekla, the ship. And for a moment, they see me, a mirage constructed from the blaze of the fire, the face of a future fantasy science fiction woman whose lifespan will miss theirs by light years. And what is a mirage but the loom of desire? So that's like the sort of theoretical example of the more sort of theoretical part. Next I'd like to read, this is like sort of the transcriber as she's transcribing kind of gets bored and like she just starts to look at things that are around her. So this is kind of part of that. This is endnote 12. Hands, eyes. I look at my features strangely as though I were another. The window of the transcriber. The window of the transcriber. Two different qualities of looking through or into something. One is opaque, a woven stream of binaries giving the illusion of depth. The other, transparent, constantly breaking, giving way to a real depth, a sort of film between the present and the beyond, a breeder of separation. I look through, into, both of them, alternating my vision, rubbing my palm against my own palm and then against another's with my eyes, my computer, my window. I've been staring out my window for the past 15 minutes and not concentrating on my work. People walk by in their hats and coats. And who is that man? That strange man imposing a tourniquet on my view. Rob Roy, inserting himself vainly onto the sidewalk across the street from my apartment and onto my text. commentary on the citation, a misplaced slab of whiteout, the transcriber's deft incisions. He's been standing there in front of 1821 for several moments. The longer he stands there, the more suspicious looking he becomes. I've often wondered about 1821, a blank, unlabeled storefront filled with plants, a curtain-shaded doorway that no one ever goes into or out of. That man is facing away from me, towards the bleak, wallpapered foliage of 1821. His head is bowed slightly as though in prayer. His hands are invisible, hidden in the lanky, limpid folds of his coat. Suddenly, he looks up at me. Or not at me, but just up. I see his face, his neck jerks nervously. Perhaps he is peeing. That's it, I decide. He must be peeing. I type, peeing. I squint and watch carefully to see if I can see a stream of urine emerging from inside the coat. His head darts up, and he looks again in the direction of my apartment, but this time I know he is also looking at me. He knows I am watching him. I, too, realize that I am watching him. It has become a sort of game between us. Him watching me, watching him. His hands drop, fall to his sides, and he sort of strolls about casually. But I know he hasn't forgotten me, and that now he is engaged in a little performance, dancing around in a circle, doing a solitary do-si-do. His audience, me, counting off his rhythm with absent nods of my head. I feel a little bit of shame, that element of slick, miniature violence that accompanies spying on strangers and other harmless perversions. He makes a slow little chicken circle and returns to his spool. His hands, his hands. Now you see me, now you don't. His hands, back inside his coat now, and I understand suddenly that the slight awkwardness, the funny manner of his standing posture is due to a slight rocking motion. His body jerking a little bit in a constant, steady rhythm, a slow dance with a strong, quick beat. I continue to watch him despite myself. His head slides to the right again, another glance in my direction. I wonder what it feels like under there, inside that ludicrous cloak. The force of my gaze is a long-stemmed desire into the tawdry, darkened hovel of the storefront window. I find myself wet.